Welcome to the first edition or first episode of Diced Onion, a Warrior podcast. We're glad you stumbled across our show. We're your hosts. I'm Angelo and that is Mike Haggerty. And we're here to talk about the amazingly fantastic show that it seems like nobody knows about called Warrior. And we're going to do this across all the episodes, starting with episode 1 and working our way up into and to the end of episode 3. Mike, what a great show this is, huh?
Yeah, Angelo, and what I love about it is that it's the fruition of Bruce Lee's dream. It took a long time, took almost 50 years after he passed away for it to come to fruition. Now we are actually, now that I think about it, as a matter of fact, this is the 50th year. This month is the 50th anniversary of his passing. Actually, that just occurred to me. Wow. So yeah, it's nice to see the fruition. Some of our fans may remember Kung Fu.
Sure.
That was the, I guess, the first iteration of what would have been his vision, which I think that was just sort of kind of ripped off and kind of co-opted and changed around a bit. Probably not, I'm assuming, what his original vision was. Certainly not having a Caucasian playing the character that he himself wanted to play, which I know is a source of controversy.
That's a different show.
That's a different show.
But you're right. Hearing that it was a Bruce Lee thing and it was related to Bruce Lee was what hooked me into wanting to give the show a shot when I finally first heard about it. Here's a question for you. When did you first catch on to this show? Because it started in 2019. I didn't hear about it until only a few months ago. And we went through that entire COVID thing, and this was not a show anyone was talking about. So when did you start watching it?
Oh, I was actually right there from the beginning. I still like TV. I watch a lot of TV. I watch live TV. I stream all kinds of it. So yeah, and I've been there from the beginning. I can say, actually, not to toot my own horn, but toot toot.
Well, shame on you for not turning me on to this show much sooner than Mike, because it came down to us stumbling across the show description and seeing Bruce Lee's name to say let's give this a shot. And since then, anyone that I have tried to speak to about the show has not necessarily heard of it. They don't watch it, and they're not sure if they would watch it after I describe it. But when I say it's based on the writings of Bruce Lee, they're like, oh, maybe I'll give it a shot. And so, because everybody loves Bruce Lee, especially people that are our age, men and women, we all watched that growing up.
Sure, yeah, that's the hook. That's what gets you hooked.
Absolutely,
it gives it a sort of an air of authenticity, actually, even.
Yeah, I agree. So with that, the era of authenticity, let's get into this episode, shall we? Let's talk about it, because we'll be alluding to Bruce Lee again as we move on through this show and through the rest of the episode. So episode 1 is called Itchy Onion, and it aired originally in April of 2019. The opening shot of the series is a picture or a sketch drawing of a young Asian girl, young Chinese girl, who we obviously know nothing about, and I guess we're going to learn more about her, right?
Right, and one thing I noticed in the opening scene, I noticed that as he's walking through the gates, as Assam and the rest of the immigrants are walking through the gates close, they shut, and it kind of reminded me of two things. It reminded me of, when you see prison movies and the doors clang for the first time, and it gives us sort of an ominous air.
Right.
That, and also I got the sense, my interpretation of it was he was sort of closing the door on his old life and sort of entering his new life. And his new life is a little scary. There's no guarantees, right? I mean, certainly no guarantees in this situation as an immigrant coming into America in the late 19th century. So I thought there was a little bit of symbolism there. I kind of noticed that.
Right. Wow, you got all allegorical on me like 1 minute into the show. That's awesome, man. But let's take it from that scene you described, right? We see the Chinese men, all men, by the way, climbing off of the boat. And we see the caption says San Francisco 1878. So it immediately sets the historical context of the series. And right away, we're introduced to the climate of the time, right? You've got the racists chanting, "Go home Chinese," and worse things than that from beyond the gates, as we see all the men coming off of the ship, including the guy who we clearly are let to believe is going to be our guy kind of in the show, right? They focus on Assam very quickly when he comes off of the ship, and we're going to learn more about him very quickly, aren't we?
Yeah, we're going to learn two things. Number one, obviously, he's very good with his hands. He's a good fighter. And the other thing that, you mentioned now, a lot of people don't know about the show. I think a lot of people don't appreciate that Assam, he's got a pretty good wit. He's got a very good sense of humor. He's got some good lines right in the beginning.
Yeah,
The
that's very, very true. He has a couple of good ones almost immediately. But before we get to that, the real initial thing that struck me right away is we see a guy named Chow greeting everybody coming off of the ship, right? And we'll learn more
right.
about Chow later too. But some of the things that he was saying to these new immigrants, now he's speaking in Chinese, everything is subtitled on the bottom, but he's welcoming them to America, right? And he's telling them about their how they're going to make a lot of money and go home rich men. Now, at any time while you were reading that, Mike, were you buying any of that?
No, no, and we find out that Mr. Chow is of a dubious nature. We find that out as we find out about Assam pretty quickly. We find out that Mr. Chow is also kind of a dubious character, but still a likable character.
Yeah,
He's
definitely. And
and
so
he clear.
he's the one telling
Sorry.
everybody, "Welcome to America," and you're going to be led from here to your new job and your new world, and then you'll go home with a lot of money in your pocket. But first, show your papers to these nice immigration officers. So obviously, I say that tongue in cheek, Mike. The immigration officers are anything but nice, aren't they?
Yeah, very much so. They're very very bigoted, and they're not appreciative. And obviously, they're making sort of an allusion to what the immigrant experience in America was, not just for the Chinese, but for everyone, especially people of color. But in this case, we have immigrants of a different race, different ethnicity, and right away it sets the tension. It sort of sets the tone for the show. It sets the tone of the show, at least as far as the conflict between the local residents. I won't call them names, but local residents of San Francisco, the Caucasians, and the new immigrants, the Asians. So right away you see that tension, and as the episode and the series goes on, we will see more of a progression of the tension with the different factions. Because it's not just whites against Chinese. It's not. It's more than that. This is just one layer of the onion. So no pun. Actually, no, I did mean that pun. Very much, I meant that
We'll,
pun.
we'll talk about the meaning of onion in a second as we go forward in the story. But the tension that you just alluded to ramps up immediately, right? The guard gets all nasty with a pretty meek Asian Chinese immigrant there, slaps the food out of his hand. And as the guy's trying to pick up his food, Assam sort of steps in here and tells the guy, don't pick that up, sort of in a sense, keep your dignity, right?
Yeah.
And so the cop or the immigration officer sees this and he immediately makes a beeline for Assam, right? He says, "Oh, so you're going to stick up for your buddy."
Right.
And he immediately, we learn something about Assam that you don't expect, which is he speaks English.
Yes.
Right.
And I wanted to say something about that actually, because I was looking at the IMDb trivia page, and they had an interesting section about this. And by the way, I love the IMDb trivia page.
Yeah, it's awesome.
I love it. So what they're saying, and if you notice, and I didn't pick up on this until I actually read it, but when they're speaking to each other in Chinese or Mandarin, or I'm not sure if it's Cantonese or Mandarin, I'm not sure. But even if the characters, what you're hearing on the screen, they're speaking English, but they're speaking sometimes
Fluently.
you assume, yeah, but you assume sometimes they're speaking English, they're actually speaking Chinese, kind of like I am Groot. Groot's speaking another language, but when you understand it. But same here. But when you notice when they're speaking English to the white people, they're speaking it with that sort of stereotypical accent, like the
Correct.
stilted. But when they're speaking to each other in English, which I assume they're just doing that so they don't have to do subtitles, but they're
Correct.
speaking it fluently. But with the English, with the white people, they are speaking it with what you would expect a stereotypical
But
Asian
I
accent.
friend to police. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So they do use that. They do use that as an excellent sort of device to help you along with the story and suspend believability and also maintain it at the same time. I think is what that does. And a couple scenes from now, we get to see them really do that for the first time. And I'll talk about that when we first come up to it. But get back to Assam now and this immigration officer. He's a pretty big burly dude. There's two other guys. He's pretty confident. He clearly bullies the Chinese immigrants around every time they get off the boat. But Assam's not taking his crap. And when he speaks English to them, well, that annoys them even more, doesn't it?
Yeah, and that kind of sets him apart. There's a couple things about Assam that kind of sets him apart from the other immigrants. Number one, he speaks English very well, and we find out that he had a white grandfather. And the other thing too, which I actually, again, I got this from IMDb. If you notice, the other members of the Hop We, he's the only one with facial hair. And it's very subtle. It's a very small
Interesting.
thing, but it makes you notice he's a little bit different. The show is kind of telling you, okay, he's not like everyone else.
That's interesting. I never picked up on the facial hair thing. I need to go back now and look at that, but I believe you, of course. So this back and forth between Assam and the immigration officer gets a little testy here. He asks Assam, "Oh, so you can speak English? You think you can talk back to me because of that?" And he says something very snooty like or snotty like, "Yeah, well you got to admit it helps to be able to speak English to talk shit to you," or something like that. He
Yeah,
says, right?
yeah. You
And
got to admit it does help. Yeah.
and then they fight. Assam takes out the first two guys in a blink of an eye, and then the ringleader of the three cops goes after Assam, and it doesn't end well for him, does it?
No, and he had that's the other good line that I remember at that part. The cop says something to the effect of, "Do you think you can handle me?" And then Assam knocks out the other two guys, and then he says, "You're asking the wrong question." He goes, "Do you want to find out?"
That's
That
the
is the
right
right question.
question. So he knocks them both out, cleans out the cops, and that is just the opening scene before the credits. I
That's
mean,
the opening scene.
I will tell you, Mike, when we turned on the show to watch it for the first time, and this was the opening scene, and it went to credit, we looked at each other and we were like, "I'm hooked," and that was it. I was all in right then and there.
Yeah, me too. That clearly was the hook. That was, I mean, the whole show is just sort of letting you know, this is a Bruce Lee inspired show, and we're going to incorporate elements of Bruce Lee's art into this. And of course, a major part of Bruce Lee's work was martial arts and how he incorporated and really introduced the West to martial arts. So we're getting that again here.
No doubt about it. So now we get into the episode after the credits, and we are, I guess, sort of fast forwarded in a sense to Chow and Assam now riding in a carriage. We get the impression that Chow sort of spirited Assam away because he has these kinds of connections, and he does indeed tell Assam, they're speaking in Chinese. He does indeed tell Assam that he's doing him a favor right now by getting him out of there, right? Because there should be repercussions for kicking the crap out of three cops 2 seconds after you got off the boat from China and no one even knows who you are. So he takes him into Chinatown, right? And introduces them or brings them to some gangsters that we're meeting for the first time. You called them the Hopway a little earlier. I tried to find a definition for Hopway. I didn't really find one. It's a fictional name for the gang, for the Tong. So I don't know what it exactly would translate to in English.
Now you got me there. I now have some homework to do.
Yeah, well, both of us. I'm going to hit up everyone I know that speaks Chinese, and there's a few, and I'm going to ask them if it really does mean anything. But this is now the scene where we first see the sort of Chinese to English translation plot device, right? Initially, Chow is describing the exploits of Assam to Young Jun and the other Hopway guys in Chinese. And then the camera does this sort of spin around and the sentence goes from Chinese to English without even noticing it. And the subtitles disappear and he's just speaking to them in English about how he was able to scrap and take out three bulls. And from there, now we get the understanding of exactly what the language and subtitling device is going to be here throughout the rest of the series. And I really liked when they did that immediately. I thought that was pretty cool.
Wow, actually, I didn't get that. I actually missed that, but now that you say it, wow, okay,
All right,
you
cool.
got me on that one.
So go
You
back
got
and
me
watch
there.
that. That's exactly when they introduce that whole going back and forth between Chinese and English, and then the accent, and then the not accent when they communicate with the whether they're communicating with the ducks or whether they're communicating with other onions, right? So immediately after describing how he was able to take out the three bulls, we see an exchange of money between one of the gangsters, who we find out is like kind of the number two, and Chow. So Chow basically just took Assam off the boat and just sold him to these guys.
Well, that other gangster, by the way, you know what his character's name is? It's Bolo, which, not to digress, but I don't know if you know this, but the characters in this show, Assam, Mei Ling, O'Hara, Bolo. I'm looking at my notes here. They're all names from characters from Enter the Dragon.
Wow, that is awesome, man. I knew there are so many Bruce Lee connections all the way through here, and I didn't in some of the titles and some of the words that they use along the way. But I did not catch that. And Enter the Dragon is probably one of my favorite of the Bruce Lee movies. That is really cool. That's a good one, Mike. That's a good one, man. I really like that. So now this guy is sold to the Hopway, and we now get introduced from the buyer, a young June, who takes him to meet the leader of the gang, who we find out is named Father June. And
Right.
he essentially alludes to or tells Assam that war is coming between the Tongs, and that if he can scrap, he's in. It's essentially what he tells him, and we'll find out tomorrow, basically, when we run you through the process. If you can fight or not? Word is you can fight. We'll find out. I think he said something like, Chow's usually a pain in the ass, but he's usually right about these kinds of things, right? So
Yeah.
Assam then says thank you and is about to go off to his room that they were taking him to. And then what happens? Father June gets a little annoyed at him and starts going off on him for not bowing, right?
Right. He didn't pay him the proper respect. It's just, and we go from seeing them being pushed around by the whites to now being pushed around by the fellow Chinese, and letting them know there's a pecking order. It's made very clear to them that wherever they go in society, whether it's in the white neighborhood or even within their own Asian Chinese neighborhood in Chinatown, there is a pecking order, and you need to understand and respect that.
I just
And
bought
I
you
think,
for the price of a cheap bottle of wine, he told Assam.
yeah, that's the exact line. Yeah, I bought you for the price of a cheap bottle of wine. So you can see very right off the bat that there's not, at least initially, a lot of value for people. Don't value him, so
Right.
he's got to earn his place. Maybe a little bit of a metaphor for all immigrants who come to this country. You have to earn your place. I guess maybe that's a metaphor for that.
Within your own and within the overall bigger
Right.
picture of the
Mhm.
country, right?
Right.
So he goes back to his room now. He gets led to his room by young June. And on the way, we learn that Father June's kind of a badass. I'm not going to go through the list of everything that was chronicled in terms of his accomplishments, but he fought his way through a bunch of wars and kicked a bunch of people's butts to finally get to Chinatown and become the leader of what, at this point in the series, is the strongest and largest Tong in Chinatown. So that's now our introduction to the leader of the Tong. He's got this dead eye. He's kind of a scary looking dude. He's not very warm or welcoming, but I guess, what successful gangster is, right?
No, they're not known for their fuzzy nature. No.
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 The scene now shifts from the headquarters of the Hopway to the San Francisco streets. It's night. It's in Chinatown, and we see a cop confronting two men who are obviously killing and hammering two Chinese men with I don't know if they're little midi sledges or whatever they got, but it's a pretty gruesome scene. But then the cop comes on the scene and sort of I guess he subdues them, right?
Yeah, and if I'm correct, that was Officer Lee, who will play a bigger part. He's
Right.
one of the main characters.
This is the first time we see him. At first, we don't know that he's anyone other than just like a street cop at that point, but he does bust up the scene. The two victims are dead, but the perpetrators, however, are apprehended, right? So that's how that scene kind of ends. The next scene, we don't know where this is going. It's a guy on the barber chair getting a shave, old time style, right, with the straight edge, and his feet are up and he's laying back. I forget if he's reading the newspaper, but very quickly you get the sense that this is a guy with some money and clearly some privilege to be laying in what looks in a chair, what looks like to be in a residence, not even at a barber shop. That's something reserved for the well-to-do, I guess. Have you ever had a straight edge shave?
I have. It is actually one of life's little treats, especially when you get the warm shaving cream,
Right.
because they can pack it on your face. It is it's like a spa day for a man, I guess. I don't know. It's really is a nice treat, actually, when you can get it.
I have had it maybe once or twice, I think, and it is the best shave that I've ever had. There's no question about it. But the problem is that the 5 o'clock shadow still comes out at 5 o'clock. So it's great. And it feels awesome for like that moment that you look great for the picture for the special occasion. But then at the end, it's just a shave. But I do recommend everybody try it once because like Mike said, it is kind of a treat. So, so we see this guy getting shaved, and then he's sitting at the breakfast table with a woman who we come to find is his wife, and they're having a very uneasy conversation, aren't they? They're not very warm with each other.
Yeah, the mayor and his wife, who we find out right away that this is probably a marriage, some sort of arranged marriage. There's not really a lot of love here. This is Penelope and the mayor. Penelope's the wife.
Right.
And Penelope becomes much more of a major character as the series goes on. But right off the bat, we find out that number one, they're not really happy together, and number two, that Penelope is really no shrinking violet. She's interested in politics, and she's got opinions, and she's no standard 19th century wife. And
good point.
Yeah, she's got a major interest in what they're talking about. She also has a major interest in what's going on in Chinatown, which we'll find out more about that later.
Yeah,
but
you make a good point. We will find all those things out very quickly because as they're sitting there having breakfast, the third thing that we learn about them very quickly, not only are they married, it's probably a marriage of convenience, they're also newlyweds, which we find out in an instant when a gentleman by the name of Buckley comes to the door, and he's, the right-hand man of the mayor, and you could tell the mayor right away with a bit of disdain in his voice says, "What is it, Buckley?" Clearly expecting some sort of negative news, and that's where Buckley reports on these murders that we just talked about a scene earlier where Officer Lee made the apprehension. And this is where what you just said happens, where as they're discussing how to keep this out of the press, the mayor's wife disagrees, voices her opinion about what's going on. And right away, we see that tension between these two as well. So now we've got all kinds of tension, right? We've got the tension between the Chinese amongst themselves, the tension between the whites and the Chinese, the tension between the mayor and his wife, and all of these things are sort of tied together. And again, we're like only 15, 20 minutes into the episode.
Yeah, and that's, you see how important that scene was where the two guys were killed, because it ties everything together. It connects the politics to the street, to the crime, to the nit and the grit of the street crime. And I thought that was a really well done scene, because you see how it, again, like you just said, it kind of ties everything together. And that's kind of where you see, okay, this is where we're going with this. There's a political end to it, and there's a criminal aspect to it.
And now that leads us right into the political end as the mayor and Buckley make their way towards what we assume to be City Hall, the mayor's offices, and they're talking about the problems regarding how these murders will play to the public, and then also talking about unemployment problems, labor issues. And this is the first time we hear a mention of a guy named Leary, who's going to play a larger role in the episode, in the series as we go along. We also start to get the hint here, Mike, that the mayor is up for re-election, and if he's going to have any chance of winning, he better start appeasing some of these rich guys that own the businesses whose employees just got murdered. And sure enough, as he gets to his office, who's waiting for him but the factory owner whose employees were murdered, Chinese employees were murdered just the night before. And there begins the political end of this game in this show, Warrior.
Yes, and you find out about this character Leary, that he's a multifaceted character, and we're going to find out much more about him. But he's not just muscle. He's a negotiator. He's got a political agenda, and we're seeing the conflict between the Irish immigrants, right, and the Chinese immigrants fighting for their place at the table, so to speak.
Yeah, good point. And that takes us right into the next scene, Mike, which is we're in the chief of police office. He's announcing the formation of a new Chinatown squad.
Which is not a very popular idea.
Not a popular idea. No one wants to work in Chinatown. We gather that very quickly. He is speaking to a police officer, and he's explaining to him that being one of the more senior men, he is going to be heading up this Chinatown squad, and he's can't come up with 3 more names for him who's going to work with him, and that he can pick one of the other guys. Obviously, Sergeant O'Hara, Buckley gives him a promotion during all of this, basically forced promotion and forced duty of of going to Chinatown. And this is strictly for show, isn't it? I mean, a murder happened on the streets last night. The public demands solutions. And so all of a sudden now they're forming a Chinatown squad.
Right. And the thought just occurred to me that as Buckley is saying this to O'Hara, that he, much like the immigrant officers, the opening scene letting the Chinese know their place, he's letting O'Hara know his place, saying, know your role. And when O'Hara balks at it, he goes, well, it's a good thing that you're in charge, or something to that effect.
Right. And then he gives him his promotion and just throws it on the desk. He doesn't even hand it to him.
Yeah. So we definitely, we're seeing how the pecking order is structured in all facets of life.
Yeah.
And
it continues on.
And I don't understand, actually. My question is, why don't they want to work in Chinatown? Do you think it's because they think it's too dangerous, or they just don't want to deal with it, or what do you think?
I think it's a lot of things. Like, who wants to be in charge of policing the bottom rung of the society that they currently live in, right? It's sort of beneath them. Meanwhile, these are guys with Irish accents, and probably 30 years earlier, they were the bottom rung getting treated that way. So I find that to be an interesting dynamic as this country evolved through its layers of immigrants that came one after the other, right? How the next group that came under suddenly became the one to get stepped on, and the one who was the previous new one couldn't wait to do it. That's what's crazy. That's what's crazy to me. But that's a whole nother episode too, right? We could do a whole show on just that.
Well, yeah, it's a cliche, but it's kind of the story of America, and that's this whole show really at its core is kind of the story of America and the immigrant experience.
So the police chief tells Bill to just go ahead and just put on a show. Just do, it's all performance or something, he says to them. Bill says to him, Sergeant O'Hara now says to him, this is bullshit. And the line that the chief throws back at him and says, of course it's bullshit. That was a politician speaking, in reference to Buckley. Another great line. This show, by the way, has excellent writing, Mike. I want to just throw that in there. The writing is fantastic in this show.
Yeah, well, that's where it starts with great writing, right? You can have great actors all day long, but they don't have the right words to say. Then it's what's the point? And we see that with Assam's dialogue, where he is sharp. Surprisingly witty. He's very sharp, and he's got a lot of great one-liners. And also, hats off to the actor Andrew Koji. Koji, and he delivers with such a wit and a sharp sarcasm. He
drips with it.
And it also does help to lighten the mood a little bit, because the show can be kind of heavy. It is very violent. There are times when I don't mind violence, but there are times in this show where I'm like, whoa. So a little bit of humor breaks it up, and it makes it a little bit easier to digest.
Bruce Lee was very good at that, although not so much verbally, more so through his actions and his eyes. But he also would tease his antagonists in his movies as well. And he had such a subtle way of doing that. And there's a lot of homages to Bruce Lee throughout this series. Let's move forward now, though. We leave the police chief's office, and we're now in court. It's arraignment time, and the court is in session. They're discussing the charges. How do they plead? They plead not guilty. Are there any witnesses? And Officer Lee stands up and says that he's going to show up to testify on behalf of prosecution, right?
Yes. And that's when we see Leary. This is the first time we really see Leary. And without uttering a word of dialogue, he demonstrates that he's a very powerful player. Very interesting. No dialogue. It's just looks, it's nods, it's a head shake. And they're letting us know this is a guy we need to watch.
That's right. He gives those two guys, because the two perps both turn and look at Leary, who's seated in the back of the court, and he just gives him one of these. Yeah. And you're not really sure what that means. Maybe it means just sit tight, hold still, don't worry. That's not going to, we're going to find out soon what he's up to. But like you said, it definitely tells you that sit back, boys. Mr. Leary's got this for you.
Yeah. And we're finding out again who all the players are. And we know that Leary at the moment is probably at the top of the heap of the Irish immigrants, at least in this part of San Francisco. And it was I can't stress enough how impressed I was sometimes you don't need dialogue. And this is the case where you didn't need dialogue.
Yeah, that's great acting.
And at this point, and Lee is in there, Officer Lee is testifying, still not aware of how big a player he's going to become. We don't quite see that yet. But we see he's a man of integrity, because he's willing to stand up and testify, and that's a problem.
That's a problem for Leary, and we're going to find out it's a problem for some other people as this episode goes on. But now we're back to Hopway headquarters, and we see Assam again holding that picture, which we saw in the opening scene of the young Asian girl who we still don't yet know who she is. But young June comes on over and he says to Assam, Assam asks him, he says, listen, I see a lot of guys around here, a lot of men. Where are the women? And that's when young June says, I thought you'd never ask. Let's go. And he takes him to the brothel so he can, I've never heard the phrase before, get some sticky. It's a good one.
Me neither. That was a good line. Let's get some sticky.
I should have looked up an origin. I failed us here, and I didn't look up an origin on that phrase. I promise I'll have it for the next episode, though.
And to some fans, they might recognize, by the way, young June from the Fast and the Furious franchise, by the way.
Jason Tobin, right?
Right. And arguably, he might have been the biggest star of the show at the beginning, arguably.
Yeah.
But then they end up in the brothel, and I have another little side piece of trivia here, and I don't know if you know this, but the character of Atoy, who we're introduced to, she was based on a real person.
As a matter of fact, I did, and I was going to bring that up as well, and I'm glad that you beat me to it. That's awesome. So please roll with it, man.
Yeah, Atoy was a real person, and according to Wikipedia, anyway, she was the first Chinese prostitute in San Francisco, and apparently she did grow to be a successful businesswoman running her own brothel.
Yeah, so we do meet her as the owner of this brothel, which young June describes as the best one, right? He talks about how some of the other ones up and down the block are pretty cheap, but Atoy is a curator of sticky, I think he called her, something like that. So, of course, being a madam, she sets up the lineup for these guys. Assam and young June are looking over the girls. There's probably about 8 girls there, and young June doesn't waste any time, right? I think he grabs 2 girls and he takes off, right? And he's gone. But Assam doesn't grab a chick right away, does he? He's got other things in mind.
No, and this actually, I don't know if this was an homage to Enter the Dragon, but it reminded me of the part in Enter the Dragon where, remember when they're offering the girls around, they bring into the different rooms, and they brought the girls over to Bruce Lee's room, his character Lee. And he said, no, but there was a girl at the party. In his case, he was looking for the other girl, I think was the agent, was another secret agent. And he says, yeah, I'm looking for a woman, but it's this particular woman.
Right.
And I don't know if that was an homage, but it certainly reminded me of that.
That's good, man. I didn't catch up on that either. And now I cannot wait to watch Enter the Dragon again, just to see what else I can start connecting to this show. So, he asks about a specific name. He tells Atoy, is this it? Is this all the girls you got? And she says something like, out of all these girls, there's not one you like. And then he asks for a specific name, Zhao Qing. And she has no idea who that is. She's like, I don't know who that is. But yet, before we cut away to the next scene, the camera quickly stops on one of the prostitutes. And then we're off to see Buckley sitting on his bed. And we learn something about him. Which is he has one leg. And that's kind of an unsettling scene because it looks real to me. I didn't do any research on the actor, but I think unless that's some excellent CGI, I think the actor has one leg.
I don't know either. Either it's very good special effects or he's a one-legged actor, which more power to him.
Somehow I get the sense this show doesn't have a special effects budget.
Yeah, you find generally the TV they probably have lower budgets. That's why some shows end up getting canceled. They're too expensive, and the production costs are too much. And no matter how popular they are, they pull the plug on them. So hopefully that's not the case here.
Yeah,
so please, Warrior, keep the budget low so you can keep the show going.
Exactly. But we have to get through this actors and writers strike, which are both going on right now. By the way, each of us, you and me, are both members of either or both of those unions, and until those are settled, we're not going to have any writers or actors from the show or try to even get them on this podcast until that's all settled and they have their agreements with their employers, because we stand with our stand with our union brothers for sure, Writers Guild and SAG.
Of course,
Absolutely.
of course.
Yeah. Next scene is back to the mayor's house, and we see his wife. He's sitting in his bed. He's got like the newspaper. He's wearing his robe. He's fully clothed in his pajamas. He's clearly not expecting any marital action to happen. That's for sure, because if you were, you're not almost wearing a three-piece suit, right? But then we see the wife, Mrs. Blake, the mayor's wife, Penelope, and she is in kind of a robe, and she quickly takes it off, and we see she's got a pretty slamming body, and he sees it too. It's almost like his reaction was almost as if he's seeing it for the first time as well. Did you get that sense, Mike?
Yeah, and the way that scene plays out is so beautiful, so funny too, because you find out ultimately that's her little fu to him. She's like, she took off her robe on purpose. She let him see her body. We could all see her body, and then she closed the door. That was like another way of saying fu.
That's it. And he goes and he pours himself a drink, and obviously going to pass out in his drunkenness, right?
Or so we think, but we also find out later that he's got plans that evening too.
We'll talk about that in a minute. By the way, I did a little research. Mayor Blake, there was an actual Mayor Blake of San Francisco. He did serve one term, not exactly in the time frame that the show opens up in, but a few years later, 1881, excuse me, to 1884 or 83 was his single term as mayor, and there are no indications that he was at all the basis for this mayor, this fictional mayor, other than perhaps the last name being the same. The first name's not even the same. The real mayor was named Maurice. This fictional mayor in the series is Samuel Blake. We haven't learned that yet, but I guess we just spoiled that for people.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, spoiler alert. Now we head to a bar. We're at a bar. We see the Sergeant O'Hara drinking his troubles away, right? So we go from one guy drinking his troubles away, the mayor, to the new police sergeant taking a slug of whiskey, while we hear in the background Leary screaming and complaining, isn't he?
Yes. And we see Leary. He's not happy with his current situation. And unfortunately, well, but we also find out that O'Hara's not happy with his situation either.
Exactly.
And this is where we see this episode is all about just kind of introducing you who the players are and how they're connected. And everything here is connected. Yep. And again, like you said, it goes to the writing. And we see Leary and O'Hara. And we see two Irishmen on either side of the law.
Correct.
And they're coming together. But we see that, well, looks like they have a bit of a relationship here. They have a bit of a connection. And Leary is in no uncertain terms telling O'Hara what to do with these guys who are on trial. Said they actually keep Lee from testifying, and that's his goal. We find that O'Hara also has some motivation too, and we sort of see a butting of the heads, but they're not really coalescing.
A little bit. They're, although they're, I'm not going to say seeing eye to eye, but they understand each other. Yeah. There's not an understanding quite yet as to what their goals are. But going back to Leary's complaining and going on at the bar, he was complaining about, I just want to go down the list here because I was taking some notes here, right? First, he started complaining about how he had to fight in the Civil War, fighting against men and killing men that probably didn't need to be killed. And then he complained about how once they freed the slaves, they didn't go back to their home, ancestral home. They stayed here and took the jobs of the white man. And then they had no jobs. And then the Chinese came in and they took jobs. And now he's getting all riled up, right? You could see the fever pitch, and he's got everybody else all riled up in the bar around him, all the other guys who are obviously unemployed and drinking their troubles away. We go back to the brothel, Mike. We're back at Atoy's, and we see four dudes bust in, and they're asking for the guy who was looking for Zhao Qing, right? And they bust into young June, who's getting some sticky, and they cut the prostitute. They knifed her in the throat right there, looking around for who they did not know yet. They were looking for Assam, and they found Assam. And what happened when those four guys found Assam?
Yeah, he had a very funny reaction. He was like, "Oh, what the fuck?" It's like, and he's of comedic value. His character helps to bring the comedy in some situation. And like this, he starts out very tense. You see these guys, these harmless looking guys, close up of their faces, and they're walking down the hall very, very determined. And then here's Young June. Oh, what the fuck?
Right after the girl gets cut, and they figure maybe he's the guy they're looking for, but Assam right away identifies himself, and they said, "Oh, I guess you're coming with us," and he's like, "Nah, I don't know who, I don't think that's going to happen." And then of course they fight right there in the brothel, and much like he did in the opening scene, handling 3 cops, he has no problem with these 4 guys either, does he?
Well, he had a good line there too, Assam, where he said, "If I was looking for 4 dudes, I wouldn't be in a brothel," or something like that.
Right. Another great line. So that cuts away to Assam being by himself. Here comes Atoy. She says, "Wow, you you forget something? Go ahead."
Yeah, I'm sorry. No, I just looked at my notes. There's something about this fight I want to put another homage. I found so many homages in the show. In the brothel fight, after he beats up 3 out of the 4 guys, he's sitting on top of one of them.
Yes.
Do you know where I'm going with this?
Yeah, go ahead. I noted it too.
It reminded me of Return of the Dragon, where Bruce Lee's fighting the guys in the alley.
Yep.
That had to be intentional. There's no way that was not intentional.
As soon as he sat down, I said, "That's a Bruce Lee move."
Yep.
I couldn't remember right away where it was from. It's from Return of the Dragon. Good job by you there. But I remembered it right away as soon as he sat down on that guy, because I could picture Bruce Lee right now in my mind doing that, because I've seen the movie 9,000 times, right? Doing exactly that. So now we're back to Assam, who is with Atoy, and he immediately accuses her of selling him out, right? Because right after he told her who he was looking for, all of a sudden these dudes show up looking for the guy, looking for the girl he was just asking about. And she has a pretty good line as far as putting him in his place in regards to who it was that sold her out, doesn't she?
Yeah, he says, "You sold me out," and she says something to the effect of, "You sold yourself out because you spoke to in front of a bunch of whores in a whorehouse," or something like that.
Right. I'm not the one who spoke my business in a room full of whores.
And then she says to him pointedly, she goes, "This is not China. This is Chinatown. There's a difference."
Right.
And I thought that was a very beautiful way of letting him know, hey, you're not in Kansas anymore. And he's not.
Exactly. Right. But then we find out that from Atoy, after she tells him don't talk in front of whores, he gets the message. Obviously, he feels a little sheepish. You could see it on his face after she put him in his place and was like, "Dude, I'm not the one that sold you out." But then she sees he feels sort of defeated about it. But then she says to him, "All I can tell you is someone else came looking for her or asked about Zhao Qing a year ago, and he was dead within a day." So now we're left to wonder, A, who is Zhao Qing? Who is she to this guy, Assam? A couple people have already asked him, and he skirts that answer, right? So we don't know that exact detail just yet. And whoever's looking for her ends up either dead or they're looking to get killed. So the mystery abounds with this one. Back to the police station. Sergeant O'Hara is now putting together his Chinatown squad, which nobody seems to like, do they?
Which, by the way, on another side note, and I don't know if this was a conscious choice, but every time I hear of a police chief or someone named O'Hara, I always keep flashing back to Batman and Chief O'Hara. I can't. It's like that's in my mind constantly. Every time I see him,
There's no way that that's not a direct homage in some weird way by the writers. It has to be Police Chief O'Hara.
And as we all know Bruce Lee was in a crossover episode of Batman from Green Hornet.
That's right.
Where he had that infamous fight with Robin, with Burt Ward. So I don't. It's kind of fun to sort of cherry pick and sort of maybe they want us to just have fun and debate whether some things are an homage or if they're just a coincidence or whatever. But
yeah, but that's a good one.
Yeah, there's a Batman connection to Bruce Lee too, by the way, and obviously Green Hornet. But
yeah, that's good stuff, man. Another great connection. So as O'Hara is describing this Chinatown squad, nobody likes it. There's a lot of grumbling. There's no choice here, however, right? Men have been assigned to this, and as Bill reads off their names, they each protest one at a time. But Bill says he's got one spot left. Does anybody want to volunteer? And one of the volunteers is our guy from the arraignment, Officer Lee. So now this is how he gets into this picture a little bit deeper and decides that he wants to join in. But we find out that he's from down south, and that's not well received in 1878, only 15 or 13 years after the end of the Civil War, is it, Mike?
Right. And again, another layer of tension, and shows you the tension between the white people in this area, or really, as you said, in the broader context too,
Yeah.
because Southerners were not well received in the North, and certainly vice versa. So it keeps adding these interesting layers of tension. There's a lot of layers to this onion, so to speak.
Yes.
So we're seeing that, and that I thought that was very well. But you also see that Officer Lee is a man of integrity too.
We learned that
see
right
that
away. Yeah.
right, and we
Yeah.
also see that he's not afraid, and
He stood up for himself here.
he stood up for himself in there.
He used one of those down home spun phrases to the guy. I can't remember which one this was. And you could see the cop's eyes kind of cross, like, what are you even saying? And before they could kind of get into it, everybody separates them. But there's the tension now, right? Now, the Northerner cops, who are also Irish guys mostly, don't like the Southerner, who is probably American born, so probably belongs here more than them. And I say belong in quotes, right?
Yeah,
I don't really
obviously
mean that, but
right.
He's hired, right? He's got the job, and now he is on the force, and he is on the Chinatown squad. We're now back to Hopway. We're now back to Hopway headquarters, and looks like Assam made the cut, and he is being branded into the tong now. He's got his arm out, his sleeve is rolled up, and they are putting a hot iron on him, Mike, like he's some piece of cattle. Back to that know your place.
Right. And I'm assuming that it was the brothel fight that got him in.
Right.
Because now the first time the Hopway got to see how he fights, and obviously he can fight.
So now he's skinned in, as they say.
Now he's skinned in, and then they proceed to have a little party. And so you see he's sort of becoming one of the boys, but you also know that deep down that this is not really what he's there for. He does want to be there in that situation.
Yeah, but he's there, and he's got something else, right? We know he's on a mission to find somebody, but regardless of that mission, he's going along with however this is unfolding in front of him. And so this is where he is right now. Back to Chinatown we go. We're on the streets. It's O'Hara and Lee, and they're strolling along, and they're kind of getting to know each other here, chatting a bit about where they're from. Lee talking about how he's from Savannah, Georgia. O'Hara talking about how he fought at Gettysburg, where a couple of Lee's brothers were killed. So there's a little bit of tension there too, just between them, because of having been on disparate sides of the recent war, right?
Yeah, and maybe that's kind of like the buddy cop movies where they always start off as enemies,
Yeah.
but then they like Lethal Weapon. I'm thinking of, obviously that's what comes to mind first,
Right.
or really any buddy cop movie, Tango and Cash, just
Tango
referencing and we're seeing here how Lee and O'Hara we will see that how they're going to come to need each other and be of. Everyone is useful, and they're going to become useful to each other. And then we get reintroduced. Not to jump ahead, but we see Mr. Chow come into the scene again, and he tells a very funny joke. Which do you remember the
Chinese,
joke?
half Chinese and half English. This is where they do the device again, right?
Yeah, like you said. Yeah, do you remember the joke?
The joke was something like, I've never come that way before, the nun said. And the other one said something like, maybe it was the cobblestones.
And again, we see a nice little tension breaking device here, which
right.
The show, I think what's the underrated aspect of it is the comedy. It's not a comedy.
Correct.
But you need to have that tension broken, and they certainly do that really well.
Much like The Sopranos used to do, in such a fantastic way, to the point where people felt like it's almost more of a comedy than a serious show.
At times,
but these guys do the same thing.
Yeah, there's a great breaking of tension there, and I thought that was beautiful. And we see Mr. Chow has a bit of a sense of humor, and he's eating some sort of bread or pastry or something, and he looks like he's just relaxing. He's
just shooting the breeze on the street with people that know him and stuff. Looks like a regular day in Chinatown there.
Yeah, and he's a man. He's moving through the elements of every world. If you think about it, really, and this just occurred to me now too, is that he's really the only character that moves smoothly through all worlds. Right? He works with the cops. He works with the Tongs. He works with the average Chinese immigrant.
And he works somehow with the immigration people because he's the one greeting everybody over there. At least he's got a deal cut to be able to get in there. So there's all kinds of connections that this guy has. And now we're going to find out what his other connection is, because the cops have a reason to go visit him, don't they? And they head into Chow's store, and he opens up a cache of weapons here, knives and different kinds of guns, brass knuckles, complimentary, I believe, is what Chow said to him. And Lee is miffed here. He doesn't understand. Like, what are we doing? Why are we not arresting this guy who sells illegal weapons? So what's going on here, Mike? Exactly.
And we see here that Lee is he's kind of our moral beacon in this show.
Yeah.
He's kind of like, he's almost representative of the viewer. You know, you're the viewer, because the average person like you or I, if we were all of a sudden in the middle of gangland and we're introduced to these weapons, and you're like, wait, what are you doing here? And that's who he is. I think he represents the moral center of the show.
Nice.
At least at this point. Yeah, he's our moral compass, Officer Lee.
I like that.
So he's kind of like, why the hell aren't we arresting you right now? He doesn't understand that. And O'Hara, he's a bit jaded. O'Hara's not a bad man, but he's just kind of, he knows how the system works.
Right.
And he's been corrupted enough by it that he's used to it. Like anyone who's involved in a system, you get corrupted by it. And Officer O'Hara Sergeant O'Hara,
correct,
as Chow says, is certainly corrupted, but it's kind of like, okay, no, this is how it is. You know, like we get this sense that O'Hara, or at least I got the sense that O'Hara, like he's not a bad man. He's just sort of little morally. He's like, okay, this is the element I have to deal with, so I'm going to play in this.
He's navigating through it. It looks like the best way he can as well. Like you said, he's been a little spit up and ground out by the system a bit. He's not a rookie. He's not fresh and upstanding as much as Lee appears to be. But we do see that their goal was to acquire some weapons. And we see now that Chow deals in weapons. And we learn from Officer Lee's not liking it, where he says something like, this man sells weapons to the Tongs. So now we know all of this about Chow, but we also learn, as Chow says to Lee, Chow friend to police, ask a bill, he tell you, right? So, and I only do that as an homage to the actors. I am not being in any way offensive. I love the dialogue and I love the snappiness of everything that they say. From there, we see, we move on, and Mr. Leary has bailed out the murderers, hasn't he? He's gotten them out, and he tells them to just sit tight, and he's going to handle the rest. So now we're seeing kind of how far he will go to advance the anti-Chinese sentiment and build up this anger and hatred towards the immigrants to, I guess, and again, to get their jobs back, right?
Yeah, in my opinion, I think that Leary's not so much a bigoted person, just bigotry is a useful tool for him. Whereas the average Irish immigrant there, or the average white person there, probably is bigoted. But my feeling, my opinion is that Leary, it's more of a tool, and it's how he motivates people. And we see that today, right? That's how certain politicians will get people motivated by appealing to their worst nature. And that's what he's doing. But Leary has a larger objective and a larger goal. And that's my sense.
Yeah, and we're going to learn more about that as we go on, too. Here we now see Assam out on the street with his Hopway brothers. He's skinned in now. He's got the suit. He's looking tight. He's got the red hanky in his pocket, and they're on the streets. And he doesn't know his way around just yet, but he gets a little brazen and he wanders off and quickly finds himself in Longzi territory. But he's like, he knows what he's doing when he's wandering off, which is he's looking for this Longzi territory. This is part of whatever that search for this girl is involved. And that's when young June comes and finds him and tells him, let's get the hell out of here. Not the place to be.
Yeah. And we see that everyone has their place, right? This time it's literally your place, your physical place, not metaphorical. And you see that young June does respect that. Young June's not afraid per se, but he's just like, nope, that's their territory. This is our territory, and never the twain shall cross. And he's kind of letting, makes that clear. And we obviously we already see the tension between the Long Z and the Hop Wei and how they don't get along. So yeah, so Assam is kind of pushing the boundaries and maybe pushing people the wrong way. And
Yeah, but he's gotten eyeballs now on Long Z headquarters and now has a better understanding of the boundaries. So we'll see how that comes into play shortly. We're back to Leary again. And this is what you were speaking about earlier, where he's trying to muscle O'Hara now and explain to him that Officer Lee cannot show up at this to testify at this trial. And he says it in no uncertain terms and then goes off to take care of what other business he has. But under his hat, he leaves a bribe for Bill. And this is going back to the corrupt stuff you talked about. Bill begrudgingly takes it, but he takes it.
Right. And Bill, again, this is where I came to the opinion that he's not an entirely evil character. He's not a Boy Scout for sure.
Yeah.
But he's just sort of, like you said, he's been a little bit corrupted. But I also want to talk about how O'Hara here for a sec.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Lee. And I'm sorry, Leary. And what I found interesting, now we see the other side of Leary. He looks like a big, strong guy. You're looking at him, he's got a rock solid jaw, and you think, here's a guy who looks like he can handle himself. And here this other guy comes up and he says, you'd like to challenge it. And he goes, you want to have a go? And then you see him have a back alley fight.
The guy's a beast that he's fighting too.
And and he's a beast. And well, it's not a problem for Leary. So we see that he's the muscle and he's the brains. So he's kind of
does it all.
Yeah, he does it all. He's not just some hulking dummy. He's smart and he's good with his hands, but that was interesting. Kind of a well-rounded character, I think.
Yeah, most definitely. So right after he leaves the bribe, he goes out back. They've got a ring in the back. This is old-timey fighting. He's got, the 19th century boxing pose where the fists are up and to the side, a la, gentleman Jim Corbett.
I was just about to say that.
Were you
about to say that? You're in my mind on that one.
Yeah, and he pummels this guy, and this guy is huge. So like you said, we got a sense now that Leary is not a guy to be trifled with, not physically and also not politically in a sense, right? He knows how to move the chess pieces on this board. We now are cut away to another brothel. It's not Toys though, and we see someone walking through the brothel wearing a mask over their face, and it's not hard to tell who that is. It's the mayor. So,
yeah.
So the mayor is now in a brothel that's not the one we're familiar with, and we find out that he's into some pretty weird stuff, isn't he?
Yeah, we find out that maybe his wife wouldn't satisfy all his needs because he finds himself in the room with a young Asian woman and a young Asian man.
And hello to you, he says to the guy.
So, yes, and he is attracted to Asians, which is maybe a little bit taboo in the society.
Right.
But he's also attracted to men, which, again, in that period of America,
is
further taboo. So, yeah, the mayor, he's got another layer to himself, too. Now we know about him.
Yeah, he's not getting it from the wife. We know that.
And maybe, actually, now that I think about it, maybe it might have... Yeah, maybe he's not interested in his wife.
Right.
She's a white woman. Maybe that's not what appeals to him.
There you go. Lots of different layers to this whole personality of the mayor, but nonetheless the mayor's into his kinky stuff, and we leave him to do his dirty, sinful business, and we move on to another rainy night where Mr. Assam goes right to it's like he was told to stay away from Long Z territory, and then like first chance he got, there he is right at the Long Z house.
Which speaks to his motivation. Whatever is motivating him.
What about thick-headedness at this point too, Mike? Isn't he a little bit hard-headed?
Yeah, and he also has a lot of confidence in his fighting skills,
right?
Which is understandable. But yeah, he's hard-headed, he's motivated, and he's good with his fists. So he's obviously thinking to himself, whatever is in store for me, I can handle.
So he goes right up to these guys who are hanging out in front of Long Z house, and he says, "I'm looking for Zhao Qing." And they all look at each other like, did he just say what he just said?
Yes. And that's where we meet Lee Young,
who's one of my favorite characters, by the way. I know I'm giving it away for people that aren't this deep into the show yet, but Lee Young has just become one of my favorite characters in this show, mostly because of how subtle that he is. But he immediately begins questioning Assam.
Yeah, and you can see that he's got no fear of Assam, which at this point, why would he have fear?
Correct.
But he's got he's got that quiet confidence, not like the other members of his Tong who are just kind of these one note, hey, what are you doing here type of thing. No, he is.
You're coming with us.
Yeah, no, he's just more kind of subtle. Like, I know I can beat the hell out of you if I have to, so I'm just going to be mellow about this. He's got a quite, and I think I agree with you. He is one of my favorite characters. Maybe arguably one of the most underrated characters.
No doubt.
Because he does have this quiet confidence, and he kind of keeps you guessing, and then you find that he himself is a genuine badass.
Yes, so, he is.
Yeah,
yes, he is. I love the part before we get into what happens next, as he questions Assam and he says, "Who are you?" and "Why are you asking about Zhao Qing?" and "Who is she to you?" And Assam is, like you said, he's witty. He doesn't take any crap. He's not taking anybody's guff, and he will snap back at somebody with his own retort if he has a good line queued up, right? And that's what happens here. However, one of the things he says to
Lee Young.
Lee Young, thank you. So many names to keep cataloged here. He says to Lee Young, "I could have diced these slow as shit onions on my way in, but I didn't." And as he says that, the four guys behind him, who I guess he claims he could have diced, all take offense and start to like move in. And Lee Young, all cool, just goes to those guys, puts out his hand, just shakes his head with like a half smirk, like, let's all stay cool here. But he don't stay cool for long, does he? Because right away now he steps up. Assam gets the chair pulled out, and Assam is on his feet, and these guys start scrapping right there in the Longzi house. Right,
and Assam is, up until this point, we've seen Assam beat the shit out of everyone he's fought almost with very little effort. But we see that, well, this other guy, this young Lee guy, Lee Young, he is no shrinking violet either, and he can handle himself.
Nobody's pushover here.
No, he's nobody's pushover, and he's not going to take his shit either. And this one kind of ends in a tie.
It does. It does. You could see each guy where there was a little feeling out process in the beginning there. There was like one little tap, and then they kind of danced and they angle each other. It was pretty cool how they kind of went back and forth until they finally got into the scrap. But you could also tell that while they were scrapping in there, neither one was letting loose their entire arsenal either. There was a holding back by both guys, maybe because they were in the house, maybe because, it was still early in the fight. But they don't get to fight for too long before they're stopped by someone yelling stop, and it's the girl from the picture.
Yes. And now we can move on, finally find out who this young woman is that Assam is looking for.
And it's Zhao Qing.
Yep.
Right.
We find out her relationship to Assam.
Yeah, we find out. Well, the first thing he says to her before we find out the relationship, he says to her, "It's safe to come home. San Yi is dead." Right. Yes. That's the first thing he says to her. So now it's like, all right, she was kind of on the run, sort of. But whoever was after her or whatever is gone. Right. But it's not that simple, is it?
No, it's not that simple. She's here now. She has this life. We find out she's a pretty important person because, first of all, she said enough. Right. And a woman saying that, and they all stopped. So right off the bat, we know whoever she is, she's very important.
Right. She's got power here. One of the things she says to Assam is that she said, we learned that she says, I paid your debt. And we don't know for what. We don't know what he did. But she was forced to marry this San Yi back in China, and he treated her terribly. She describes the horrors before she escaped. So we don't know what it was now. Now here's the relationship, more tension, Mike, another layer of it thrown on into this show between brother and sister. We learned that she's a sister here at the same
siblings.
Time. They're siblings, right? So he did something in China to offend this Sun Yi, who was a warlord of some kind. She was forced to marry him to get Assam out of his death sentence because she said, "You would have been dead if I didn't marry him." And she took the abuses until she was able to escape. This is at the point where she sees on his arm his Hop Way brand, and she tells him to get the hell out.
Now we know, okay, first of all, she was mad at him to begin with, but now we know they're in rival tongs.
Yeah, we didn't know that until right now. We knew Long Zi was, the opponent, right? The opposing Tong. We knew that, but we did not know that now his sister is someone of importance in that organization.
In a rival gang. So that's
rival
going to be an
gang.
awkward Thanksgiving dinner right there.
Yeah, talk about awkward Thanksgiving dinners. We find out now who Long Z is. He's this old, frail man. He's not quite filled with the same piss and vinegar as Father June. This guy's in a little bit rougher shape. He's in bed. He does not want this arguing between Tongs. Father June said in the beginning of the episode, war is coming between the Tongs. We also know it's because the Long Z overstepped their bounds. They broke the treaty by selling some opium. That was mentioned earlier. We should have mentioned that. And that's what's causing this initial tension that we're finding the show in. And he wants to set a meeting with Father June. Why? He says, because we're the ones who broke the treaty.
Yes.
Right? So you can sense here that Zhao Qing, by the way, her name is Mai Ling. She tells this to her brother in their argument that Zhao Qing is dead. She died in the bed of the guy who was raping me, right?
Another dragon reference that name, by the way, Mai Ling.
Mai Ling is right. Is it Enter the Dragon or
Enter the Dragon? I think it's Enter the Dragon.
Yes, it's an Enter the Dragon reference there. And you can tell that Mai Ling does not necessarily like the idea of reaching out to have a meeting. We've seen this device in many gangster type shows before. Phil Leotardo did not like when Butchie suggested it when he was ironically walking through Chinatown.
Yes.
So she does not like the idea of reaching out to these guys. Now we are back to Atoy, who is with Assam, and they're talking. They're in the brothel. She could tell he's in a little bit of pain because he did get beat up. And they go upstairs to get high, right? They're smoking some herbs of hers, not opium, she says, but some herbs that will help with the pain. This is where they talk. He tells her that she's his sister. And now she knows that Mai Ling is the sister of Assam. And this is obviously troubling news, as you described, because they're in opposing tongs, right?
Yes.
We also get to see another sex scene here, or maybe it's the first sex scene of the series, and it is Assam and
there was the
Atoy.
brothel scenes before. Remember with the mayors, you're walking through. You get some side
the other stuff.
Yeah. So, but it was the first full featured sex scene. Yeah.
Right. So it's a pretty good scene. The actress that plays Atoy, I believe Olivia Chen, right?
Cheng,
yeah. She's excellent. And she's a great actress. We'll find that out throughout the rest of the episodes as well. We move on. Now we see Mai Ling meeting with Buckley. This is a little weird. This threw me off the first time. I said, wow, what's going on here? They're in a carriage, a horse-drawn carriage, having a conversation about business. And he's asking for chaos and blood, not peace. So it looks like these two are clearly in cahoots, Mike.
And what's fun here is that they're both the second in command in both of their worlds, right? Buckley's the second in command, and also Mai Ling is the second in command. But they're the ones really pulling the strings. Probably more so in Mai Ling's case, because I think Mayor Buckley is a little bit of a stronger character.
Right, Mayor Blake, right.
I'm sorry, Mayor Blake. But we also see, I'm getting Buckley mixed up. But Buckley, he's just kind of, all right, yes, sir, no, sir. But behind the curtains, underneath he's the one who's
a lot of machinations.
Yeah, a lot of machinations going on here. And so we see the two second in commands were really pulling the strings of power, but again, more so probably in Mai Ling's case.
Yeah, and they're cutting some kind of deal for violence to continue or to get picked up again in the streets, and they also are cutting a deal for more product. Buckley is obviously her opium supplier because he says the next delivery will be coming, and she says we'll take care of everything from here. So now another level of intrigue in what's going on in this story, right? Because Buckley on one hand is telling the mayor, you got to get your arms wrapped around this Chinese problem. But then on the back end, he's in business here with Mai Ling and one of the rival Tongs. So if he's in business with Mai Ling, he's clearly not in business with the Hop Wei. So now that's another antagonistic angle that may very well be explored moving forward. All right. Yep. The next scene is pretty graphic. We see Atoy. Yes. She puts on like a gray hoodie. She pulls a hood on over her head and she takes off. What do we see? We see the two murderers, the guys that got bailed out by Leary. are, outside behind the bar. They're a little tipsy, I think, and they're relieving themselves up against the wall, as drunks tend to do at 2 a.m. when they've had enough, right? And all of a sudden, we don't see it, but we hear that sound of a sword, right? We hear that cutting sound.
Yep.
And the one guy who's going to the bathroom against the wall looks down, and there's the head of the other guy.
Yes.
Yeah. And then coming out from like the shadows is Atoy. She's got this big ass samurai, kind of not even samurai, big sword, like a chop machete type sword. And she goes to town on the other guy, and she guts him and slaughters him right there on the street. And she leaves them both for dead right there.
Yes.
She's hardcore, man. She's hardcore.
And we don't know why. I mean, we kind of can guess that she's paying them back for killing the Chinaman.
Absolutely.
But we don't know what else is involved in that. Is this strictly a vigilante thing? Is this revenge? Is she part of some group? It leaves you with questions, but great kind of questions, because now you want to follow up next week. Why did this happen?
Exactly.
And I thought that was a great piece of dramatic. That was a great dramatic scene, because it gave you the action, but it also left you with some good questions. Okay, now I got to come back and find out what's happening next week.
Yeah, and the one immediate consequence of all this is that Officer Lee is absolved from showing up to testify now. So that's kind of like the one big exclamation point that I took away from this episode. There's not going to be a trial. The perps are dead.
Right, and I'm sure that helping Leary was not part of her agenda, but Leary, you can see, benefited from this, if the Irishman in question did not.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much Leary benefits, because he wanted those guys out and walk in the streets, because that's the real defiant FU to the system, or to anyone who cares about the Chinese, which is, we can slaughter you guys and still walk the streets. Instead,
good point.
They slaughtered them, and now they've been slaughtered in the same grisly fashion.
Okay, interesting point. Yeah, you're right. That's a good point.
So that's where the episode pretty much ends. We see Assam one more time. He's angry. He's going through his martial arts moves. He is pissed. And that's where the show ends.
Yes. Great first episode. Great opening to the show.
Great first episode, Mike. I can't continue to say how much I really loved it, and it made me want to just continue to consume more. I think I watched 4 more episodes immediately after that one, and I still cannot get enough of it. And great job by us, I thought, for a first time doing this, man.
Yes.
In preparing, I didn't know how it was going to necessarily go and how were we going to flow, but it worked out pretty well, and hopefully the listeners like it. And we will do this again for episode 2. So everybody out there who's watching this one or listening to this one, get ready, because we will be rolling these out in chronological order. And again, once the strike gets resolved and the writers and the actors can get back to like promoting their shows, we will definitely be reaching out and trying to get some of them on the show to talk about anything that they're willing to share with us, for sure, Mike.
Yes. Let's get them on Diced Onions. Let's do it.
Diced Onions. That is it for this, the first edition of Diced Onion. Again, we're your hosts. I'm Angelo Fioris. That is Mike Haggerty. Make sure you follow us on our YouTube channel. It's called Diced Onion. And make sure you subscribe so that every time we post a new episode, you don't miss it. But that's it for now.
Hit like
Thanks
and
for watching. What's that?
Hit like and subscribe.
Yes, hit like and subscribe. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next
time. Thank you.